right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As folks are coming in, we're so excited to continue this Unevent series where we'll be talking about bootstrapping and scaling innovation. And I think the thing I'm excited about is talking about different examples of effectual innovation. So as we get started, I would love to just go kind of around the horn and have folks introduce themselves, and then after that, I think Paidi will maybe talk a little bit about Stone Soup, just a quick version for folks, because I think that sets a great example. But if we, I'll just kind of call out panelists, and if you don't mind introducing yourself. Fran, we'll start with you. A pleasure to see you
Oh,
today.
I was trying to make up a story while everybody else talked. Um, I'm Fran. I am based in Dallas, Texas, USA, although I am a proud Jersey girl, as Bruce Springsteen says. And my focus is change leadership and leadership development. So um, several of us on this call have had hearty conversations, I'll say, about the actual challenges that people experience when they try to change. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Fran. Barry, why don't we go to you?
Yeah, I'll take a segue from Fran. Hi, I'm Barry McGee. I run business intelligence for Citrix. I previously had a somewhat similar role in IBM, where I was for 15 years, and I'm 3 years now at Citrix. My role basically is my job to try and make the organization more data driven, and it's not about technology; it's about culture. And I suppose that's my practitioner hat. I've sort of got a research hat as well, where I've done research masters with UCC, and now working on a PhD in this sort of field as well, on transformation, but in particular data instigated transformation.
Excellent. John, why don't we go to you?
Thanks, Matt. Hello, everybody. And I'm just looking at the list of participants. A lot of people here I know, so it's great. I'm John Morley. I'm based in Sunnyvale, California, and I'm originally from Cork, so that's hence the Rebel link, Matt. And I've taken to describe myself recently as, if I look back on my career, as sort of being thrown into fix complex challenges, where there was sort of never enough headcount and never any money. And discovering actually that you're also never short of options in those situations. So that's what brings me to the conversation. And I should point out, just as I look at the participants and the attendees, a lot of people here who've helped me along the way. So I'm sort of excited to have the conversation and get their input as we go.
Excellent. Thank you. Paidi?
Yeah, hello all. So I'm dialing in from Cork City here today. So actually a very, very nice day here. A sun is shining for a change. So look, my area is innovation management. I suppose I've been in that space for nearly, 28 years now. I think we added up recently. And my real passion is about how can we get innovation teams to innovate in a more effective way, and it's particularly with a focus on bolder innovation, and I do that really through working with organizations, mentoring people in organizations, teaching at an executive level, and also research.
Thank you. And just for folks that don't know me, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. So Matt Arnold, I am coming to you from Iowa City, Iowa, and where I have my own consulting firm, and I focus on basically kind of the human-centered design, brand strategy, and innovation space, where those elements come together. Career of over 25 years that have been mostly focused on innovation, large-scale change, sometimes continuous improvement, and large technology implementations. I also teach innovation at the University of Iowa. I have a class called Leading Innovation, and we focus on the human side of innovation. Unfortunately, it looks at more case studies on where innovation has gone wrong, or we might call it innovation theater, where organizations put up everything that looks like we should have innovation, but they don't have the results. And I've been in environments. That's why I'm so excited to talk today about more the scrappy nature of effectual innovation and success stories that we might share, rather than doing these negative postmortems where companies have spent millions and millions for very little in results, except maybe tarnishing the name of innovation. So, Paidi, if you don't mind, I think it's a great way to just kind of tee up the conversation. And I say this, I mean no harm. Is there a quick version of Stone Soup that we might share with guests? But to set the framework of what is effectual innovation and how the story of Stone Soup is a great kind of symbol of that.
Yeah, I'll take it, Matt, that some of my stories are a bit too long, so I'll try and give the abridged version of Stone Soup. So I know I tell this every so often to sort of explain what effectual innovation is in a sort of a very meaningful and what I thought was a very quick way. So I'll even speed up the quick way. So really, effectual innovation starts with a key question, and it really is, what's the best possible future we can create with the resources we have without any of us having to take on undue risk. And I think if you see that in action, really you start to see principles starting to fall out, and some of those principles are captured for me in that old European folk story, which is Stone Soup. So the very, very quick version of it really is you've two visitors to a town or a village. They're walking through the village and there's very little engagement in the village. Everyone seems to be behind their own doors in their own homes doing their own things. So they make their way to the small village square. In the meantime, they picked up two stones, which they later called their magic stones. They have a pot that they use to feed as they travel through the land. They put the stones into the pot, fill it with water from the stream, start to build the fire underneath and stirring the pot. And surely but surely they start to see people sort of looking out the windows and doors of neighboring homes, until one of them, of these neighbors, is brave enough to make his way down to them to ask, what are you doing? And I suppose the reply then from both of them is that we're making delicious stone soup, as if it was obvious what they were doing. And they invited this neighbor to join them for delicious stone soup. So the neighbor is watching for a while until the two of them turn around to the neighbor and say, wouldn't it be lovely if we had some extra seasoning? On which count the neighbor says, oh, I could bring some carrots, goes away, retrieves some carrots, fills it. At this stage now, the other neighbors are really intrigued and start making their way towards it. Now for them, seeing the first neighbor add the carrots, it's easy for each of them then successfully to offer maybe a bit of asparagus, thyme, or whatever else. And slowly but surely what we have is truly a delicious soup. All the neighbors join in the square. At the end of it, they have had all a fill, and they've also had a very enjoyable session together for the first time in ages. So I suppose the story, or the moral of the story, really is about how we can deliver a lot more by working together, where we all can commit a small amount to a bigger purpose. But there's two elements to it, Matt. There's, first of all, they did enjoy the stone soup, but as the visitors were leaving the village, they donated these magic stones back to the village, that anytime in the future they wish to work together to achieve a bigger purpose, that they gather in the square around these stones. And really, they are the principles of effectual innovation, this idea that the future isn't preordained, that we can design our own future. It's all about what assets we can bring and we're willing to share towards that. And we can do it in a way where we're not taking on undue risk, any of us individually, but collectively the risk is reduced by the more each of us contribute. So that's the very, very quick version, Matt.
Thank you. I love it. I really appreciate you laying that out as a framework, because I do feel like it's great. There's so many things in there that we could pull apart, but a couple things with effectual innovation. You're essentially starting with a bare minimum, right? The pot, a vision, and some stones. And the notion too is that we don't know what is really going to end up in this, stone soup. It's not a fixed recipe, but the contributions from folks, as you've said, that they're assets that they're willing to share, and they're not taking on kind of undue risk. So I appreciate that. And I know before we went live, Barry, we were kind of talking a little bit about stone soup, but is there a version of stone soup in Dublin?
The Cork variety, no doubt, will be probably heavier and will line your stomach better. But I suppose I'm listening to Paidi's analogy, and my background is for a mixed sort of commercial and a bit of a research angle. I run business intelligence for Citrix, and previously had a similar role where I led data transformation for IBM. And as Paadi's telling the story, I'm actually thinking, yeah, I get the whole thing, but in terms of stakeholders, they'll turn up, they'll look on the ball and say, that's just stones in there. You tricked me. So there's a little bit of that, but I absolutely get the principle. Well, first off, the principle, you need someone to walk out of the room first. The bit that was interesting for me there was, you need one guy or one lady to walk out of that house and say, what are you doing? And then you've got maybe a bit of a network effect that kicks in. Okay, I think there's probably nothing overly unusual in that, but my experience is that the experience I've had time and time again is that you don't need to spend huge amounts or big technology. Too often, everybody rushes to buy in tech, build me what I want, not necessarily what I need. That stakeholders 9 times out of 10 don't even self-diagnose their problems correctly, so we end up solving symptomatically as opposed to causally. And in actual fact, if you actually start to understand what the core problems are, you can, to use the phrase, you can bootstrap this stuff much more effectively. You can do it lo-fi. I mean, for me, lo-fi and iterate off lo-fi is the only way to go.
Barry, I love it. I mean, just because I come at the world more from kind of human-centered design perspective, right? And it's so much prototyping and lo-fi early, and one of the ways I divide prototyping is build to think and build to decide. And so those early lo-fi, are we even thinking about this the right way? But I find that being a big challenge in organizations is the vulnerability that might be needed to confirm, is this the right target? Right? Are we on track? And I'll open that to the panel, but I think you've hit already an interesting part is is the self-diagnosing or even understanding the problem space, because I would argue a lot of times we end up proclaiming a solution more than we understand a problem. And so that's where I've seen big projects struggle. So I don't know if any of the panel, it looked, Fran?
You're on mute.
Sorry, Fran, you're on mute.
Things you never want to hear in today's world, right? I think self-diagnosing the problem is critical. There's another nuance that I'm hearing in what Barry's talking about and what effectual innovation is about is that when I can view my resources from a different perspective, I often find new uses for what I wasn't even aware was useful. So to go back to stone soup, I might have seasonings in my cupboard that I didn't even think of using. And then somebody says, oh, we're making the soup and just bring whatever you have. And I go, oh, I have stuff that might be valuable here that I didn't realize was valuable. And so a lot of the opportunity and the challenge on the people side of this is helping people to take a different perspective on how they view the problem and how they view what they might have to be able to contribute to it.
Thank you. Want to just dig in on that a little bit too, Fran, is what do you think sits behind that in organizations? And also do you have tips or tricks that help unlock that for either the individual or the manager? Because sometimes I wonder, is it a power dynamic at play? Is it me as an individual not realizing that I have so much more to offer, or at least, sorry, I know we have an international audience, at least in the States, a lot of organizations I worked with too, is a lot of people afraid to be their authentic selves at work, and they actually have a lot of skills. To your point, they probably their pantry might be fuller than they even realize on things that they might contribute, but they've already been put in a hole on how they're viewed in the organization. Sometimes they start believing that.
So John will tell you, well, first of all, one of the phrases John and I use every day is that our goal is helping people liberate trapped value. And value can be trapped in myriad ways in an organization. One is just the organization itself, processes, procedures, decision-making style. But the place where the biggest shifts occur is understanding where I trap my own value. Do I look at my resources in a way that I might see something fresh? Do I operate from what I think is being safe when if I don't contribute what I have, I am most definitely not safe? So we have this strange cognitive dissonance about defining what risk is or what safe is in today's world, when the only way to be safe is to be out there on your own leading edge.
Can I come in on that one? I get a good point. I'm going to throw in a bit of a curveball in that. Is there an assumption that me, whoever this is that we're giving this opportunity to, even wants to innovate? I mean, my experience is that certainly in a lot of larger organizations, there is almost a natural level of process inefficiency, which builds up organizations and builds up organizational fiefdoms and little kingdoms. And there is a little bit of an element of the emperor who has no clothes. Is that you certainly go in with some effectiveness of it, like, hold on, let's just slow down here. Because lots of organizational waste breed roles and breed entire units and business units. I heard a phrase once from a colleague, it's like turkeys voting for Christmas. It's like, maybe there is a disconnect. So when we talk about wanting to innovate, who are we talking about? If you go in at if you go in at a certain level, the innovation that you're presenting to that individual, they might have a certain scope on an individual level to innovate, but in the broader sense, whoa, you mean I can be replaced by this process efficiency? And there's a pushback. Now, if you go in right at the top level, they go, oh yeah, they don't care, right? We'll shut that bit down there. We don't need so many headcount. So depending what level of the organization you go in to try and inject this innovation, a serum, that you will get culture rejection if you go in at the wrong end, because of disalignment between what might be rational, but behaviorally might go, no. The whole behavioral economic thing.
That is the challenge to innovation, is that it flies in the face of our own desire for safety and survival. Bottom line, I think if we called it effectual keeping up with the marketplace, it might not trigger as much, I'm not innovative, or as you said, am I going to make myself obsolete? How do we support a culture that says the best way to keep your job is to be looking at what you contribute to new ways of doing things?
Right. Yeah. Fran, I love that. Like it's the idea, like, what if we said we're playing a longer game, and these are the ways that we can extend the sustainability of our organization, of our livelihood? Yeah. And Barry, I know, as soon as you were saying that, I was hearing conversations at an organization I was brought in to be an innovator, and remember having conversations with people. We've done this for 30 years. We never needed that before. Why do we need it now? Right. And I'm sure some of those conversations were going on at Kodak in the late 90s, right? As they burned through $28 billion war chest because they couldn't reframe or rethink how they were doing things. Paidi or John, strangely, haven't heard from either of you yet since the intros. Your thoughts too on some of the topics that have just been raised so far, because there's a lot of different rich areas we can go.
I think just a thought, and it's not a starting point from my point of view in general, but if I look back over the last number of years in my career, I've typically been brought in as the fixer or somebody to try and make things come together. And I reached a turning point about a year and a half ago when sort of somebody who kept saying no to me at every turn said to me, and I think I meant to mention this to you, Matt, in a conversation, I love you. I can beat the crap out of you and you keep getting back up. And I thought to myself, I don't like that actually. And I'm not sure this person understands that. But it is interesting that there's a form of resilience in there, and it's taken me on a sort of a bit of a journey of exploration. And part of that exploration is actually, for me, I feel really strongly that if you are pursuing this sort of effectual innovation, that it does start with the individual, and it starts with the self-awareness and sort of an understanding of who you want to be, and just simply finding out amongst the people you're talking to, what are their aspirations and who do they want to be. It brings me to a character I dealt with last year who sort of kept just saying to me, you don't get it, you don't get it. And what I got really clearly, the more he said, you don't get it, was I understood what his agenda was. It didn't gel with what our team was looking to do. So it's kind of, it's sort of that sense of being able to step back and look at it and go, right, this is actually what's really here, and this is the landscape that's really here, and sort of untangling from there. And I think as we go on through the conversation, we'll drill down into some of those themes a little bit more. But that's a very strong learning for me over the last.
John, thanks for sharing that. I know, just thinking about I think this is complementary to some of the effectual innovation work, especially the teams and the risk that we talk about. But for me, one of the things that, from a group dynamics perspective, I always tried to share that within our teams, it's all right to beat the hell out of an idea, but not each other. So hearing somebody getting off on beating somebody up, it just reinforced the idea that there are still a few sociopaths floating around in
Matt,
I
should add that, because as you were talking there, and I was thinking back over what I'd said, I don't want to suggest in any way that I knew the whole story either. But it is a sense of, one of the things that it led me to is that in pretty much all of these innovative scenarios, we are dealing with complexity, which is simply situations that are beyond the ability of one individual to see the whole system.
Absolutely.
Then things become a little bit easier. That's
Thank you. And thanks for the clarification. I appreciate that. I note too is, I love the idea of persistence. And to add a little bit more international flavor to this, a phrase that I steal from the Finns is sisu. It doesn't have a direct translation to English, but it's basically this deep level of grit or persistence, and how we need that. And I think, as we're even in the stone soup and the assets and the risk, we all do have different levels of what persistence means to us, or what risk is, or what we can give up. But like a healthy level of group persistence seems to be important here. Paidi, your thoughts so far?
So I want to maybe try and pull some of these things together, and I completely buy the comments from each of the panelists. I think some of them, though, I'd maybe try and reframe. I think Barry is right. Depending on what level you go in, you're going to hear a very different story, and you're going to have maybe different issues. But at the end of the day, I think no matter what level you're going to organizations, those organizations are struggling to innovate at any of the levels. And I think that's a massive issue. I think John is hitting the nail right on the head. You know, if you go in at a senior executive level at the moment, we're hiring these superman, superwomen executives thinking they can understand complexity, and that they'll be able to preordain the right strategy, the innovation direction for that company. It's absolutely impossible, and it will never, ever happen. But at the same time, every time things get more difficult in the environment, we're putting new layers into those organizations. I think now is it the average organization that has more than 5,000 employees has about 7 to 8 layers between the executive and the people that are at the front line dealing with other staff members, customers, etc. So if anything, we're introducing even more of a tax on everything we do, a bureaucratic tax. And by the time you try and innovate anywhere, information is trying to go up, direction is trying to come down, and the whole thing just comes to a standstill. For me, the only way of really innovating is really trying to democratize the way we innovate. And we see it working in some organizations, you know, particularly organizations that are held up as being very agile, where the layers, the decision making is collapsed down, that decision-making power is invested into teams that operate in very close proximity to customers or staff, depending on who you're innovating for. And I think what we then do is hold those teams accountable and responsible by empowering them. So I think, look, innovation, and we said it at a previous event, is broken. We know there's ways of addressing it. That's where effectual innovation comes into play for me in terms of empowering teams to innovate in a way that's more effective than what we currently do.
Can I come back on that for a sec, Paudie? Just one comment is, I maybe add to Paudie's idea about the democratization of innovation to a question around incentivization. Because to an extent, back to the point, and I've got a couple of examples whereby you can give the tools, the means, the impetus to innovate with communities. And yeah, that's not on my radar, sort of thing. And that incentivization, because back to the point that there's almost an assumption that it's logically, I mean, when you step back and you say, wouldn't it be better to be able to do this better or that better, and it's make your job easier? Yeah, in theory, but you know what? I'm happy doing what I'm doing. There's this whole mix of, you know, whether you want to call it behavioral stuff in there that will block what on paper looks like a perfect template for innovation, because other hidden stuff in the murky waters, as Paudie would say, that will block it. So the question about incentivization, I think, is very. I don't mean that literally in like a financial way, but our goals aligned, and back to this idea of coherence. Sorry, Fran.
There is a way to incentivize that isn't financial, and it's one of the most overlooked resources on a leader or manager's part, and that is your time and attention. And in the 30 years I've been consulting around change leadership, every single group of people will tell you that when I ask them, where do leaders spend most of their time when you are in the early stages of transition attempting to get momentum? And it is always the vast majority spent with the people who are complaining and dedicated to telling you why they want to slow down. Now, some of that might be your innovators who have a better idea, and that sounds and looks very different than the people who are going, yeah, in theory that works, but I have learned if I just keep my head down long enough, this will pass as well. This is just yet another one. So to incentivize the people who are helping lead you into the future, give them your time and attention, highlight their contributions, make them visible.
It's to Paudie's story, it's finding the first person to step out of the door for the summer suit.
Well, on the dance floor, as Paudie likes to say, who's the first person and the second person out on the dance floor?
I'd like to give just an example of this so in our sort of attendees list, we've got a former colleague of mine, Jay Erickson. So I'm going to give Jay a big shout out, because Jay and I had a really long look at this when we were at Hitachi together, and we built what we called a catalyst network. And actually, from my side, how it came around was that plan A of a project involved resources and headcount, and it didn't come off. Plan B was, we'll go over to their team over there because they get it, and went over, and actually they didn't get it. So plan C was, I found Jay, and Jay's working in the sort of learning and development space. And I said to him, Fran, to your point about let's not spend time with the squeaky wheels, let's actually spend time with the people who are trying to innovate for themselves. And we built a network, and I would say between us, we all brought something to that. One of the key things I learned from Jay was actually how powerful learning and development models are for innovating practically, because it's about knowledge and a passion for knowledge and sharing that between people, and sort of tipping things from sort of the implicit or the tribal to the explicit. And so I think to your point about incentivization, I think it's Daniel Pink wrote Drive and said it's not actually all about money. It's about the ability for us to manifest our own personal aspirations. And I think that is just a thing that companies just by and large don't get, is that if you get an employee workforce that shows up feeling that they can manifest their own aspirations while working to your direction, you've got a massive state of flow on your hands there if you can tap into it and encourage it. And I think that goes, Paudie, maybe to the heart of effectual innovation as as a theme? I'll sort of pose that as a question.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, John. And there's a few things there, because when I hear that, I hear we're creating a new space. It's like the square in the village. We're inviting ambitious people that want to make a difference into that space, and that's your catalyst network. You're giving them the tools, though maybe the training and by which to operate differently, so they can operate at a higher frequency nearly. And what you're doing is giving them air cover. Now, I think in different organizations, the air cover comes probably in two different ways. In some organization, there's maybe someone at a senior level that's willing to back it, and that's enough cover. In other organizations, you're doing it in the weeds, really, where it's very local, it's out of sight. You know, you can start to prove the results very locally. Then there's a contagion, because people say, geez, what's happening over there, and they seem to have very good results. Can we do a bit of that? Or people are starting to move out from your team and bringing the ideas out. So I think that is effectual innovation, John, because it's about really the assumption that we don't have the answers at the senior level, but look at all those individuals we have further down this hypothetical pyramid that have all these abilities, where we're only using about 20% of those capabilities at the moment. It's a no-brainer to know.
Yeah, just for our conversation too, focusing on examples. So John, thank you. Positive examples where we've seen kind of this bootstrapping, and just want to go back right to what Fran said too, is just the notion of what leaders have that they can incentivize. And I think listening to Barry too is sometimes I say it's usually when I'm a little cranky, but the organizations we have work by design. Right, so we get the behaviors we incent. So it's good or bad, this system has been put in place. And Barry, I've used examples like everybody could stand around and know that this patient needs a heart transplant to survive. Everybody nods their heads, right? And then still after the heart transplant, right, the body still might reject it. It's seen like negatively as a contagion. And so I've seen some of those on the negative side. I appreciate John bringing more positive light to this, and Fran, I think like, and if we might share some examples, we'll throw in our positive bootstrapping stone soup. What might be an ingredient, and who wants to go out on the dance floor or the square first with a positive story of where they've bootstrapped?
I'll have a go first. My 5-year-old here is just looking for attention. She's not 5, she's 4. I've been corrected. I think you all heard that. I give you one brief example where we were introducing an innovation in IBM, and when we were trying to figure out, okay, what are we solving for here? We went to one layer of management, said, well, what's the team working on? Now there's workers, first line managers, second line managers, and across the team is probably about 100 people. And the second line manager says, we're doing these 8 things. We're selling this. There was 8 strategic priorities. I said, okay, right, we're solving for that. Then do you mind if I just check with your first line managers? Go to each of those, of whom there were 8. And they say, yeah. Let's say, Paidi, I get this Paidi stuff, but I don't do half his stuff. And I've got these other things I do because I've got other stakeholders I do stuff for. And then when you got to that level, there was 20 different, mutually exclusive, unique priorities. And I said, oh, we're onto something here. I said, do you mind if I talk to your team? And individually went to all 100 people, interviewed them all, and talked to, well, there was about 80 people, and there was 100 different unique imperatives. So we call it the 8-20-100 rule. And the issue with the problem with that, I say, is that you have a problem. There's this cognitive dissonance, I think Paidi said earlier on. And guess what? You don't know you have the problem. So you've got like a madman doesn't know he's mad thing. So the first thing you have to do then is you have to pick that apart. And one thing that we've done really successfully, we used to have a structure in my team whereby customer says, I want this. We build it, we go, ta-da. And they go, no, I didn't ask for that. I go, oh, you did. The way to break that apart, we change the organization. So even though I'm in a technology team, for every technologist I hire a transformation expert. And we change the structure of the team. So we go, what do you want to build? Stakeholder pillar, we build it, center of excellence, and then we slowly release it into the organization. We don't do a ta-da. You surface it, we call it the insights phase, to almost create awareness of what they thought they wanted will actually not be what serves them best, to literally turn on the lights in the organization. Because from a, let's say, a data and analytics perspective, what you effectively do is, no matter what the initial ask is, you end up shining a light where everybody thinks they're Brad Pitt and they realize, oh my God, I just looked in the mirror, I'm not Brad Pitt. I thought I needed a faster, whatever. And you have to sort of dim that light slowly, as opposed to flooding the organization. And they all see this, oh my God. You dim the light slowly, and then you let the organization come to a self-awareness of this disconnect before you then move on to the next stage. So we release early MVPs of everything. So they come to this awareness at the same time as us. It allows them to adjust. And then we start pivoting towards a final release of whatever that artifact or solution is. But the big change there was, don't build what they ask you to build. You sort of iterate, high iteration levels at an early stage.
Barry, thank you. Also, when you were talking about multiple priorities, one of the things I found interesting, I wish I could remember where I read it, but that the word priority did not have a plural for a long, long time. There was only singular. You had priority, right? And now, but now, like the way priorities are thrown around too, it's like, I do see that as a challenge, because people can just, I have these priorities here and these here. And then it's also like a picking and choosing on what might be easiest for them. And that could be positive or negative, right? But just interesting versus getting to some of the shared agreement that you're talking about. And maybe as an organization or community, turning those lights up slowly a little bit and coming to grips with where they're at.
Barry, can I ask Barry a question?
Absolutely.
So you said for every technologist, we bring in a transformation expert. There are a lot of people in the chat talking about cross-silo leadership. And in a sense, the transformation expert and the technologist are like a cross-functional collaboration or a cross-contributional, just made that up. Can you share like what tools or skills specifically a transformation expert brings?
Yeah, good question. So basically, again, the field of industry, data and analytics. There's an assumption that the customer, stakeholder, whether it's the CRO or the CMO, says, oh, I want a widget machine. Well, we build it. Or they think the solution is in the technology, not how you use the technology. So you just turn on the technology, they're going, well, what's the answer? Well, you have to figure out how to use it. So the transformation person role is to work with them to help to use the technology to how to transform their business. So what's the problem you're trying to solve for? We'll build something, and then I'll help you almost value engineer your business, change processes, invent processes in order to leverage the capability we have just built for you. Okay, because my experience, again, a lot in larger companies, again, a lot of leadership teams is very heavily weighted on execute, hit the target, hit the number. If you were to do a lot of psychometric analysis, you'd probably see a bias towards people who are very big on their red and their execution profile, but maybe not so strong on their strategic or their mapping or their process. They're probably less systematic thinkers. So you need to help them with that. So the profiles of the people I put into those roles, very system-minded, systems thinkers, basically. People who see causality and not just the symptoms. People who, to use a phrase of my wife's, people who are not afraid to swim upstream. So everyone looks like a good swimmer when you're swimming downstream. So someone who isn't afraid to actually challenge what they're being told. You get people who go, you want what? Yeah, okay, I'll do it. And off you go. And you think that innate sense of approval comes from doing what I'm told to do. And a big companies reward you for that. On a personal bit, is he someone who says, really? You sure that's what you really want? Or is that just what you think you want? So there actually absolutely is an innate need for this character, he or she, to be very questioning, good critical thinker. I've got people in these roles who are not technologists, who could know one piece of code from another, someone who's in a sales world who's never worked in sales. So you don't have to have domain expertise, but you need to be a good critical thinker, process systems oriented, and not afraid to ask challenging questions, and to be able to do that in a very constructive way.
So would it be fair to say that what they listen for and what they speak with the user about is their intention as opposed to the solution? So
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. For good active listening.
And sorry, I want to jump in just a second there, Barry and Fran. So from a human-centered design perspective, right? That's sometimes where design thinkers and designers can be seen as super challenging people. But it's sometimes really understanding the intent, the goal behind that question, right? And not having and early on not having a solution stated in the problem. And just a quick example where I was doing work for a major international agriculture company. They produce tractors, sprayers, harvesting equipment, and we were redesigning basically what would be like the infotainment system in the cabin, where all the data is coming in, and as these machines and tractors are becoming near autonomous, right? There's so much data coming in. What does it mean? And really sorting out the human experience from the engineering experience. A lot of different things going on, and the cabins are already designed, right? These are hardcore factory elements, right? That like you got to cut new steel if you're going to change the cabin design, right? They can be really expensive. It's not just like pushing new software to the cloud when we get an update. And there was a request that some of the customers want a bigger screen.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we're like, well, what does that mean? Right. And at first, it sounds like you're an idiot. We just told you a bigger screen. Right. And it's like, well, what about the screen itself isn't working? Is there too many data elements co-present? Is a flow not working? And one of the things we did was a quick prototype session where we mocked up different monitors. We brought farmers in from around the country to their training facility, went out in the field in some different tractors, tested some different things, talked to them about their experience. And it turned out they didn't want a bigger screen. They didn't want a bigger monitor. They wanted an uncluttered monitor, and they wanted a little bit more flow. And I wish I had the number offhand, but we had calculated the number of millions of dollars we saved by just doing this small event to confirm the need. And Fran, in my world, I just call it goal-based design.
I call it intention versus mechanism. And John has an example that I'd love for him to share because it's one of my favorite ones.
Awesome.
Sure, Fran. And I'm gonna breadcrumb my way over to one of the questions, Matt, that popped up around skills and competencies, because I think this is all connected. I think Fran and I work together a lot, and one of the stories we like to talk about, is why does somebody buy a drill, right? So the story is they don't want a drill, they want a hole. And of course, if you actually go a little deeper and say, well, why do they want a hole? And the particular story I always like is, well, this is to build a bookshelf, right? So why does somebody want to put a bookshelf? Because there's lots of books lying around. And how does that make them feel? Well, actually, it makes them feel quite anxious. So by actually bringing some order to the books, to getting them on the bookshelf, what you're actually doing is buying security. So what somebody is doing in buying a drill is buying themselves some peace of mind and safety.
And it may or may not be a drill that they need.
And it may or may not be a drill, exactly. And so if I could sort of breadcrumb from there to come back to what Barry was talking about, Barry and I, in a little preamble right before we came live, Barry, I mentioned I had been in a world quite similar to yours until recently, and one of the things that sort of denoted our situation was that we were dealing with groups that had come together through merger, through acquisition, and so they kept talking about the drill. But really what we were getting at was overcoming a huge amount of fear and animosity across these teams, and teams that had jumped the gun and brought things out to market and actually had customers and were saying, we sort of planted the flag, we scored, and the organization just hemorrhaging because of this. And so having to sort of untangle a lot of that, or say, I'm not going to spend the amount of time it's going to take to untangle all of that. Let me go around and do some shuttle diplomacy here and find out where is their shared aspiration or shared purpose, where is their shared intent, to Fran's language. And I learned a huge amount. And in fact, sort of the output of that exercise of doing that was literally getting to a matrix spreadsheet, which just showed, here, listen, you can argue and debate all these things, but 90% of the time you have shared purpose. Now, from a strategic point of view, however, you don't have the skills and competency that you're required to pull this off. So at what level of this exercise do you actually want to engage as a collective? So I just wanted to share that as an observation, and that is that innovation can happen because opportunities are arising. It can happen because we have big honking problems that if we don't solve, you run through Kodak's $28 billion, Matt. But I do think that two things that emerged for me that were very strong was, one, and Barry, you talked about it, was understanding the sort of cognitive archetype of people in particular roles. That's just a no-brainer for me, which I've learned thanks to Fran in particular. But also really appreciating that, do we have the skills we need as an organization? Because that takes us through to our ability to create value. And that takes us right through to our ability to generate revenue. So Matt, I don't know if we want to kind of explore that whole space as well.
Yeah, sorry, Matt, if you don't want, I got to jump in.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, and maybe it's to challenge the way we think. You know, do we really need someone from another function to come into our function, or a consultant to come into our function, say we've a problem? Like, no shit, man, we know we've a problem, and all the spreadsheets in the world, and you know, won't solve it. Like, I'm fairly convinced a big part of the issue is we already have, in most cases, resources, people, I hate the word resources, people within units, cross units, that are waiting to address problems, but they're not empowered to do so. They have the capabilities, they're closer to customers than anyone else in the organization, they're closer to other employees than anyone in the organization. And actually, if we empower them, in many cases, we will get fairly immediate results from just allowing them to do things that they can't do at the moment. Not alone will they do things that they can't do at the moment, but actually their whole experience as an employee goes through the roof. And like, I think Barry and maybe John, to an extent, are sort of painting the picture as to how things would work if bureaucracy works. I think both of them are not really telling us the true organic style that they really did things in their own organizations. And I know, because I know both of them well enough, Barry and John have bootstrapped. You know, it didn't take all this high fidelity technology. It didn't require all these, you know, frameworks and whatever else. I think it was a really organic approach, which was about finding people, like Fran said earlier, that will come onto a dance floor and that are energized by flying towards a problem, that are willing to take on a problem and work together under some sort of cover of our protection. So I think, guys, like, I would love to work with Citrix based on what Barry says. John, Hitachi sounds great, but I'm saying that the reality is that both of those initiatives don't really work the way as, you know, people from one function come in solving a problem. I think it's a far more organic approach where humans, you know, work together.
How would you surface that, Paidi? Sorry, go on, John, you go.
Sorry, no, I'll let you go first now, Barry, because I'll take the challenge from Paidi and
I was going to say, I'll take the bait. I'll take the bait. So to put flesh on Paidi's, what he was subtly alluding to there, I started off doing some of my stuff, and you know, it was probably about 7 years ago in IBM when I used to run a big commercial sales team. Surely there's a better way to drive our client engagement mechanism. You know, can we use data? It's this whole new data thing. Big data was sort of kicking off, and you know, you couldn't get budget, no budget release or anything. So literally started off with a spreadsheet, and let's get a bit of data together to see if we can challenge what is being dictated to us as the modus operandi for engaging customers. Talk to a customer when they have a renewal. Think of like an insurance business. We say, no, talk to a customer when they have a business problem. Now, what happened in truth was we saw enough evidence that we were getting it right more often than we were getting it wrong to say, oh, hold on, there's something here. And it worked sufficiently enough that it then attracted more interest, attracted a bit of investment, and then we moved it from one unit to another unit, and then it went EMEA wide, and then it went global. Now, what started off back then as like one dude with a spreadsheet and an idea is now a multi-million, platform AI thing in a different organization, and it scales fast. And if truth be told, if I had budget and technology, I would have got it wrong. And it was actually better bootstrapping that way. So literally was like even prototyping, to use Paidi's phrase. But I mean, without focusing on the negative bit, but we probably learned lots having done it the hard way. But just to give an example of what that sort of hacking, I call it guerrilla innovation, and I'm actually thankful I was never given budget, because if I had, I would have done what everyone else does. Go out, buy MarTech, buy solutions. Doesn't work.
I think that's a really important point you raised, Barry, is that, and Paidi, I might challenge you back a little bit on your question. Barry, you said the thing about not having budget. None of the stories that I think I've certainly mentioned today so far, and we'll do over the next few minutes, there was never any budget or headcount there. The story I mentioned at Hitachi was just 2 people engaging with 7 teams that for over a year had struggled to come together, and we brought them together in 2 weeks and actually spat out 2 prototypes. And that was purely going and sitting with the individuals and having conversations and allowing for them to share. To be honest with you, my favorite story in there was, and it's a good prompt, Paidi, was one individual who everybody else pointed the finger at. And when we went and spoke to her, and I would say with a great degree of anxiety, and sort of said, why are you not sort of getting on board with this? She said, because I don't see any value in it. And so the simple next question is, well, what would make this valuable for you? And then she just opened up. And so what we realized was that we weren't building towards a stated and prescribed goal. We were building from a perspective of shared aspiration, and the goals that we would move towards would be things that would emerge because we had come together. And so we put in place some principles, and principles was that one of the key principles was there has to be value in this for everybody. The moment there is not value in this for somebody, they need to raise their hand and say, this isn't valuable. We're not going to challenge them on it. We're not going to put them on the spot. We actually have to design together. And so I think that to me was sort of that thing about actually going and talking to people in a real way about where they are, and not delving into the problem so much as actually finding out what it was they really needed to pull from something. Fran, I'd love to maybe pull you in at this point, because I know you've a lot of insight here.
I passionately believe that we have the processes, we have the spreadsheets, we have the strategies, we have the ideas, the what we keep coming up against, and the reason why transformation and innovation and an adaptive culture are so challenging is that our brains are wired to resist changing the way I do my work, and to expect that, account for it, and manage through it fast is required to keep up with the marketplace. To get the best from people requires being able to speak to them one-to-one or in small groups about, we know this is probably a little unnerving, and so we're going to start small. We're not going to go from 0 to 60 this week. We're going to go from 0 to 10 and notice that, and build momentum. And it requires deep attention to people. And, Barry, as you say, that kind of cognitive barrier to what we all want, because we are complex.
Can I, on that, guys, there's so many interesting things here. We need about 2 or 3 more podcasts, Matt. But you'd be amazed though at how few companies, in my experience, have the luxury of that breathing and space and time and say, really, yeah, let's get a whiteboard out. What's wrong with you? Just do it, okay? And another thing came up when we were talking a few minutes ago is you'd be amazed at the resistance to when, John, to some of your points there, or actually, Matt, it was your example about the the agricultural manufacturer about the big screen. If you had you effectively what you were asking is, well, why does the customer want this? I don't know. The customer asked for it, just build it. The resistance to the word why is astonishing. I also think that there is absolutely a thing about archetypes. We keep talking about organizations, but these problems manifest and are presented by archetypes. And on reflection, most of my professional career has been in sales and marketing, where there's an absolute bias on execute, execute, execute. You say, why is this happening? Why is it a problem? They're maybe not that oriented that way. So therefore, when the ability to self-diagnose, causally more than symptomatically becomes an issue. Whereas if you had the same conversation in an engineering department or a manufacturing department, they'd give you all the reasons why, but wouldn't be able to execute as fast. So you've got all these things, and I think it's overly simplistic to maybe think of diagnosis or presentations of problems or articulation of problems at an organizational level. It's always at an individual. It's always at an archetype level.
Yes, and John and I talk about this a lot too. Not everybody is going to be great at the divergent thinking that's involved in innovation and transformation and just new ways of problem solving. And so asking people whose cognitive archetype is more targeted toward execution to come to the meetings where everybody's in divergent thinking is painful for them because they're not good at it, and as a result they don't care about it the way the people who are good at it do. So what I would wave a big flag around, Barry, is that companies think this kind of thinking, I call it so that what? I don't say why. It's like, you need a big screen, so that what? You need a drill, so that what? That is not a luxury. That is a key to creating an adaptive culture.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
The story that's reminding me of, and I show my age here, if anybody's seen the old Crocodile Dundee movies, there's a great scene in it where somebody's asking Mick Dundee how he deals with problems when he's back home, and he says, well, I just tell Wally. And then what does Wally do? Well, then Wally just tells everybody else, and then it's not a problem anymore, right? So I always kind of feel in this situation, Fran, if I borrow you and me, I'm sort of the Wally. One of the things that I love to do, and it's scrappy, but it's fun, is I love to find out that once we know that the hierarchy is looking at something, and I've seen this over and over and over and over again, is that if you look at a strategy, and I'll borrow sort of a quick, dirty sort of view of strategy as sort of saying, what's the aspiration? Where will we play? How will we win? Do we have the skills and competences that we need? And do we have the systems do we need? I will tell you, every time I've been in a situation, the hierarchy gets down to the top two and then doesn't know jack about the bottom three. And that means going down into the organization to finding out what's there, who are the adaptive thinkers, who are the resilient ones, who are the ones that are just happy to get it done, but be great at getting it done, finding out those cognitive types. Sort of, I love Barry's, the whole team is coming over, brilliant. Yeah. And so it's finding that mix. And then for me, always partnering, Fran, I'll call you out because we're working together at the moment, partnering with somebody like Fran who can speak exec, and just between us actually getting that overall perspective of the complexity of the situation. And again, when I say complexity, I don't mean to say that that is a difficult or hard situation. It is just simply, it's too big for one individual to see. So how many people can we bring into the tent who can communicate openly without fear and sort of say, I think this is what we're seeing. What do you think? What can you bring to this? Can we let this emerge? And I love that sense of start small. And I'll sort of add one other thought onto it, is that I've been in so many situations where people decide to make a change and they want systemic change. I mean, why on earth would you go for systemic change? First of all, and I'll throw this in as my own bias, I don't think you can call out what's in a system until after the fact. I think anything that's emerging is not a system until you look back on it and say, okay, they were all the pieces that make that happen.
Can I jump in there? Sorry, Matt.
No, absolutely.
So I'm agreeing and disagreeing, and I'm flip-flopping between. So I do get it that organizations don't feel they have the luxury of doing it. I think that was a comment maybe Bar made there earlier. The reason they don't have the luxury of doing it is they're so busy being bloody busy. They're so busy being bureaucratic. Like the studies that show maybe bureaucracy puts, is it a 50 to 70% tax on everything we do? in organizations. And it's no wonder we don't have the spare cycles to do anything different. But if you look, and I've had maybe the benefit of working in engineering companies, in software companies, in the healthcare space, is if you walk through most of those organizations, you can see people being busy. You can see people carrying pieces of paper around, and literally that vacant look. They're zombie employees, and they're in every single organization, and there's more of them in bureaucratic organizations than anywhere else. For me, it's about releasing some of that bureaucracy, and it isn't going out and trying to change the organization in one go. In fact, I would suggest these sort of teams, effectual innovation teams, can coexist within bureaucratic organizations. They're an anti-pattern. In fact, you're more likely to find them in bureaucratic organizations, and there are groups of people that are willing to eke out time to make a difference in their own organization. And very often what we do is we I suppose do that by piggybacking off things we already have to do. So there might be an existing project to deliver X, and what we can do within those projects is say, yeah, we will deliver X, but imagine what else we could deliver if we came together and worked on it, and imagine the ambition we could achieve. So we now have to cover of the project of delivering X, but what we're doing is look at all the other things we can also deliver within that project. And I think we see this, there's inner sourcing now, which is an internal variation of open source. We see it within open source communities. We can see people that where they literally their eyes light up when they're given these opportunities. They're no longer zombie employees. They're now employees that feel they're making a difference in their own organizations from the ground up. And very often those employees and increasingly are becoming the change makers in their organization. And we now see, and I at the last Unevent, we maybe gave the example of Satya Nadella is an example of someone really that brought agile into a bureaucratic organization and then brought that right up through the levels of Microsoft, which essentially turned around the organization. So I think this can work, but it can work in bureaucratic organizations where we feel we don't maybe have those cycles. Those cycles, as far as I'm concerned, are there. It's just we haven't figured out how to release people.
Do you or the others, Google had this practice, and it's become a little bit less vogue now, but the 70-20-10 rule, where 70% of your time was based on execution for goals for this quarter, 20 for the following quarter, and 10% of your time you could spend on whatever. Just get out there and think of things to do. And that for me was I love that. And we tried something like this in IBM, where we ran a big innovation program around, the entire IBM staff in Ireland, and we had like thousands of people engaged. And it's like a classic portfolio approach. And if 10% of the people feel empowered to go do it, let's say you get 50 ideas, maybe 40 would be rubbish ideas, but you know what, you only want the 1 or 2 or 3 ideas. It's a genus to like just to drive it. It's like goal planning. You want those few great ideas, and it's worth the investment of the 10% of time. But it seemed to have gone, I remember doing some looking at it a while back, and it seemed to have gone a little bit out of flavor. And I don't know if you guys have any experience on similar programs and how that's driven that.
I'm going to again being provocative, but not being provocative. There's already spare capacity in your organization that will give you in excess of 10% back towards innovation. Because look at the way we manage emails, look at the things that the stuff we're doing. And when someone, if you go into an average team, and this is my experience, and you ask the people on the ground, what are the 2 most stupid things you do on a day-to-day basis where there's no legal or regulatory inquiry, they will list them out for you. And I
don't think anyone would debate that, but in order for that to happen, though, there needs to be a structure, a program, even if it's loose, if it's guide rails, to allow them to do that. Come on, John.
Jump in on this. Actually, first of all, and this will, Paidi, to your point about provocation. This one will be interesting. I've actually done a good bit of research into that Google 70-20-10, and it's not at all as pretty under the scenes as it looks like on the outside. A lot of people don't actually do it because if those 20 or 10% projects don't work, it's not a good look. So there's an element of that that's involved in that means that some of that is dying away. Also, I think with the change to Alphabet, a lot of that sort of culture was squeezed a few years ago. To the other point though about the 10%, and again, pointing out Jay here on the attendees list, part of what we strove to do at Hitachi in building that catalyst network was to identify those people. I'm thinking of one individual who was in the services space, and every time he got a good result, he actually lost people because they were so creative amongst themselves that his people kept on getting pulled off and to go work in different parts of the organization. So where I wanted to go with this a little bit was there are, to Paidi's point about the pools of capacity that are untapped. I'm going to take a look at your learning and development teams. These are passionate educators. They love information. They are dying to help people learn to become better at what they can do themselves. And yet what they're tasked with doing for a lot of the time is just sell education to customers along with a product. Now, you can take some of the people that are involved there and say to them, let's go help some of our adaptive thinkers who would love to go and manifest their own aspiration, don't actually currently have the skill set to do it. That's effectively what Jay and I and a few others built at Hitachi. And suddenly, and I've mentioned my buddy back in services, we started to educate him a little bit on some of the ways he could deal with these hits that this organization kept getting. And he kept getting ahead of the goals. And so I think what it does require is a little bit of this creative thinking. It's like, I would never have known that we could have done that if I hadn't met, the learning and development team. I wouldn't have never known that you could take knowledge transfer models that exist very firmly known in the knowledge and education space and apply them to, productivity and efficiency goals. And so I think we're suffering, and I go back to the point that Gina and Jennifer pulled out in the chat around the silos, is that it's not even bureaucracy, although bureaucracy is a huge tax. It's just we don't know what we have inside our organizations. And so if we could go around and create the time for some, I'll pull on everything I know about everybody in the attendees list here. If we had what Johnny Moore calls unhurried conversations on a more regular basis, I think we would discover incredible amounts of value and motivation and and I really say this purposely, get into that state of flow at an individual level, because if we get the individuals excited, it'll spread. And I've seen, Paidi, to your point about effectual innovation examples, I've seen that too many times to have any doubt that it would work.
John, I think what you've said too is I'm wondering about so stealing from a couple different areas, but like when it comes to making better decisions, right? I'm a big fan of Annie Duke, and I saw Annie's name come up in the chat too, right? But she talks about decision hygiene. I'm wondering about a concept. I'm thinking about what Fran said, and going back to our stone soup about us not even knowing our assets. But is there almost a pantry hygiene if we're going back to stone soup? Like, what ingredients do I have? And I'm mixing all my metaphors, but we were cleaning out the garage the other day. As our kids are getting older, there's some toys they don't use. And in our neighborhood, you put out a sign that says free, right? And then what we noticed was the neighbors across the street with little kids like that were perfect. Those were an asset for them. They were garbage for us. I'm just wondering too, how we might better almost have a free market connections of these assets and ideas in there to enable new ideas, new things come together, assets, because I do feel sometimes when people are caught in the bureaucracy, right, is that these frames start to set in and become like a calcification. They see themselves this way, they're positioned that way. I can only do this, but periodically, are there ways that we might refresh, stretch, talk about the assets that we have to share? And then is there some recombinant thing where this is going to be the best damn stone soup this quarter because we just found out John's been sitting on ham for an entire quarter. We didn't know we had that. Barry has split pea. This is going to be great.
I would say one of the simplest, not necessarily easy, but one of the fastest ways to get to and a greater awareness of your corporate intelligence, your corporate genius, is to go, as John said, the people in the learning and development department, that's their job, is to understand the skills and competencies and resources in their organization so that they can deal with any lack or gaps. But in looking for lacks and gaps, they know what is there. And so they're an excellent resource.
One thing on that, the only thing I'd say to that though, Fran, is that most L&D teams that I've experienced with, they are tasked with assessing organizational capabilities against certain very desirable objectives, such as, do they understand the product? Do they understand how to sell? Do they know how to digital market? I think it's a great idea, but I'd be more interested almost in, is there a way we could almost codify the organizational knowledge that sits at an individual level?
Can I can I just jump in on that? I think it depends on the organization. For me, in some cases, HR just aren't at the races at all. HR don't know what's happening locally. And in fact, in some cases, HR will block people doing anything other than a very tight job spec, etc. There's whole questions about IP. There's all sorts of rigmarole. Guys, this stuff, effectual innovation, is already happening in most large organizations. I've been talking to someone in the NHS, really bureaucratic. When it came to COVID, what did they do? They started acting locally to make a difference because they knew they had to make a difference, and they were empowered to do it from on high, because on high realized that they had to make certain decisions. They needed people locally to make the right decisions, to deliver care locally. So we can do it during COVID. Why can't we do it going forward? Also, I think if you look at, there's examples like if you look at NASA, again, a fairly bureaucratic organization back into the 80s, they were still using a lot of the technology they'd used in the Apollo missions. And next thing, a renegade, what were called the Apollo renegades, started looking at clustering off-the-shelf products to deliver a more robust control system, and did it in the evenings, did it at lunchtime, did it whenever they could squeeze it in, and it was only then it was accepted within NASA as being a more viable and a
But isn't
better
that the point though, Paidi? It's always the renegade or the outlier event that drives it, because the rest of the time there's maybe groupthink going on.
But see, the reason we call them renegades is they went against the bureaucracy. They had to do it in a more organic way, Bart. So they're not renegades as in trying to cause damage or whatever else,
If I might, and you sort of tell the story a lot, so I apologize for sort of telling it again briefly, but out of a marketing role, myself and about 5 others were at the genesis of a product that got to $2.5 billion a year at EMC. And I think following very much what you stated there, actually to the point that when it became aware to corporate engineering that we'd built a product, they flew somebody out from Boston to sort of effectively probably fired a lot of us until we met them at the airport with a $12 million PO and sort of said, sorry about that, but what do we do with this? And where I wanted to go with that to the point about the renegades is, like, I have a very strong sense. Now, it's not for everybody, but I'm just going to say this. I have a very strong sense. It's like, don't clip my wings. I'm really interested in finding what drives people in a positive way so that we can actually have a generally good life for everybody, right? So I have a very sort of abundant mindset. Now, I've come around to understanding that that's what it is, because I've taken the hits and I've caused the problems and I've tried to convince people. And now I'm firmly sort of on the path that, go and chat to people in the background and give them that encouragement to just probe and just explore and get something small, because no organization will ignore a constant, steady uptick in performance. And that's what I've seen. And even in situations where I've come up against massive resistance, I found what I would sort of call the Warby Parker origin story, which is, if those of you familiar with Warby Parker, who looked at how do you create an entirely new optical industry when 85% of the existing one's owned by one company. Just build a damn other way, and keep your eye firmly on where the opposition's going to come from, and don't trip them up, but just show that it can be done in a different way. And I think that gets to the heart of what I'm perceiving as effectual innovation. And one other thought, and I tie this maybe back over to Fran, and that sense of understanding 2 things, that we are all different. And that I feel very strongly that I'm a divergent thinker. I'll go and sort of say, what's that now? And oh, that's really interesting. Paidi said that and Barry said that. And I wonder if we put them together. I don't know what's going to come out of that. So I need somebody sort of further along the cognitive sort of line to be able to say to me, oh yeah, listen, this is how we can help that scale. Because I don't know. And if I said to you, there's one thing I think that's difficult, it's not being a renegade or having resilience. It's a lack of knowledge inside organizations that actually this approach works. And so we are going to have to go out and actually continuously talk about it and continuously give people sort of comfort that do it small. And sort of I'll hand it back at that point.
So Paidi, one of the things I wanted to just, my gut's telling me, but we were talking about the pandemic and COVID. One of the not only local responses to where things are, and unfortunately in the States, highly politicized, right? But what we saw at the vaccine level, right? Unprecedented time. We have 4 viable vaccines to treat one of the deadliest things we've seen in 100 years, right? I find that fascinating, right? We had, was it Pfizer first, Moderna second, can't remember, then Janssen or Johnson & Johnson here in the States, and then AstraZeneca like coming up fourth. The idea that any of those, any one single one happened, and these all came from different areas. But I'm curious, like as we strip away the bureaucratic friction and tax, certain things were opened up, and different sets of researchers in different companies were able to come up with solutions, grant different efficacy rates. But the fact that in our lifetime, we saw 4 different vaccines for a problem emerge that quickly seems fascinating.
You're talking about what I think is the core issue of any kind of innovation or transformation at the corporate level. And that is that we did all of that because our survival was literally at stake. And to go back to something that Barry said, the people side of innovation and transformation, the investment in understanding your people and having conversations is still considered a luxury when compared to the numbers we have to hit today. And as long as it's a luxury, as long as it's a theory about this might help us in the long run, it's not going to get the urgent attention and resources that survival calls up.
That's back to the John Cotter stuff. If there isn't an actual sense of urgency, you need to create one in order to break through the stasis of the status quo. Exactly. And to Paidi's point is, it's all great find out the one goal part, the one person who wants to walk out of the room. But how do you create the urgency or the interest for that person to walk out in the first place, or for anyone to stick their head above the parapet? What if the culture doesn't have a preponderance of those people? How do you find that one? I mean, and do you institutionalize? Do you the minute you standardize it, then it becomes the status quo, and then like the 70-20-10 rule, then it flattens out. It's this constant, peak and trough thing.
I'm almost going to throw out there, I think there's a subset of every gathering that you get of people where you'll find those people.
Yeah.
I think they're there. And I was just reminded of going back into my old TV and movie days. There was a famous line from one of the early episodes of Friends where Chandler is basically saying if he doesn't go into the office and doesn't hit that enter on that database, like nobody's going to notice. I mean, there's an element that comes with a degree maybe of familiarity with the scenario, where when you get handed that task that is bureaucratically annoying, you can just say, I'm on that. And you can just say, I don't think anybody's going to notice. So there is a degree of sort of familiarity with your surroundings that you probably need to have before you jump into some of this stuff. But it is there.
John, I think on the humor side, but kind of an indictment of the bureaucracy. Years ago, this was before BP and Amoco merged. So I was doing work for Amoco, and a friend of mine was really impressed with this new young intern and how hard the intern worked. And I said, well, tell me what's the intern producing? Said that, well, I don't know, but I see his jacket on his chair early in the morning, and it's still there when I leave. Like the thought is that the intern. Then it turned out the intern would take the early train in, put his jacket on the chair, and screw around in the city of Chicago all day, and then pick up his jacket on the way home. Did nothing, and that was his intern. But he was seen as a highly productive person.
Yeah, and I think also, and I know similar examples, Matt. In terms of people going for long lunches, but you leave the coat on the back of the chair, or whatever. But look, I think we're upset again. For me, bureaucratic organizations are obsessed with identifying these people, and it's really only bureaucratic organizations really have this drive. Who are these? We need to find them, as if we need to find them to control them. I think if you reduce the friction, the collaboration friction, then you will naturally see people starting to come together to cluster. In other words, they now feel they can go into that village square or onto the dance floor. They will naturally start to, you'll see the corridor conversations, the water cooler conversations, where they're starting to even collaborate on existing projects to deliver more than the ambition for those projects. And I love this idea, and I want to bring it up, and I think it was either John or Fran used it before, and it's key to bootstrapping, this idea, allowing people to bend, break, and blend. They will naturally do that, but they won't do it as long as, again, that bureaucratic tax is in place, because the penalty on them is too high.
Sorry,
go ahead, John.
Sorry, I'll get this right. One of the lines that just changed my outlook completely came last year when I first met Fran, and she talked about, and we mentioned it earlier, is that method follows intent. I think thanks to the proliferation of methods like design thinking and some of the innovation techniques, I think we're a little bit more receptive to this creative thinking than we would have been in the past. But if you think of it as a sort of a motorway or a highway where there's just continuous set of off-ramps, you get to the sort of, the agile Nazi and the design thinking Nazi, and it's like we get so pulled into what's my method, that I think what we got to remain is that these things are all exist in support of the intention. And that if it means that we're not quite going to follow all 5 steps of design thinking, then that's okay. And so I think that's important to sort of retain that outlook, because I do think there's more of an acceptance for creative thinking now than there was 10 years ago. But we haven't lost that.
Yeah, but John, the actual stats show that the level of bureaucracy is actually increasing. It's not reducing. And funny enough, let's say a larger percentage of the price of a lot of products is tied up in bureaucracy. So I think, yeah, we like, and I'll put my hand up. We've been involved in training lots of individuals, lots of teams within organizations to use a lot of these really democratic skills, design thinking, etc. And I refer to them more as a mindset, but they will then tell you how they go into these large organizations and they try and use these skills, these new approaches, and that overhead is just too high. Literally, they just can't make it work. They're not given the space to make it work. Others aren't given the space to collaborate on it. So there's no point giving people all these skills and ways of thinking if the organization is just literally imposing that bureaucratic tax all the time.
I agree with you.
One of the things I would add to that is, as you were saying, that what that made me think of is sometimes when I think of innovation, I think of change, I think of leadership. Those are more like mindsets, or they're more like going to the gym, right? You can't just do it once and say you're a leader, right? You can't just do it once and say you're an innovator. And yet I think some of these programs, they're in a transactional check the box kind of bureaucrat. Yep, we did that. We did the innovation thing and we didn't see the results, right? So sometimes I see those challenges, as well as how might we give the time for some of these things to blossom. I think I've shared this story with you, but one of the talks I give, I use Simone Biles as an example. In my class, I show a picture of her as a toddler, and I ask if anybody can recognize who this beautiful baby is. And then I show a picture of her today with all these medals, right? And I think sometimes organizations want the Simone Biles of today performance without any of the toddlers are going to make messes. They need help sitting up, standing up, walking, let alone tumbling, right? And so sometimes I want it, like, is it the air cover, the free? Where do we provide that sense of opportunity and grace for people to practice? I think for me that is just the notion of practice is a word I keep getting hit with. So how might we practice? But
Matt,
yes.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, and I was just being sensitive of time. I know we got about 5 minutes left, so was probably going to get some last round thoughts.
I want to just throw one thing in this stone pot or whatever metaphor we're using at the moment. If I am working in an organization whose bureaucracy tax keeps me from contributing at my highest, get the F out. Waiting around for bureaucracy to magically liberate me.
You're talking about the individual to get out, right?
For me, it is always individual. And if you are one of these people, I would also encourage you to take a look at how often we go to the bureaucratic type of work, because it makes us feel in control. It gives us a sense of comfort. I don't have to think. Let me just fill out these, spreadsheets that I have to use to report. So, my deal is none of us is a victim of the organizations in which we work. We are free to walk at any given time. So own your part of it. And if you're working in an organization that you care about and you see bureaucracy as putting it at risk, raise your voice.
Thank you, Fran. I did have a mentor at one time that would always say, participate in your own rescue.
Yeah, and I think actually related to that, it's really interesting. You go into organizations and sort of transformation is in the interest of leaders, but the failure of transformation very often is in the interest of managers, because transformation in some case will eradicate those 4, 5, 6 layers of middle managers. And what we really need to do is now start to mobilize those 4 or 5 levels where they become far more innovative. They become internal entrepreneurs within their company. And that is possible. We see higher, let's say the Chinese company buying GE appliances in the US, literally transforming it into a more entrepreneurial business. So the real threat to successful transformation is actually a layer where more and more employees are being employed onto it. So the number, back to the point I said earlier, that bureaucracy is increasing, the number of middle managers is increasing in most organizations. And really we need to figure out how to mobilize that layer, collapse down the distance between the senior executives and the customer, and in the meantime mobilize these middle layers into a more entrepreneurial role within organizations. I think Hire, if I remember correctly, did it leave something like 10,000 middle managers either go or reassign them into innovation type roles.
And can I just, last thought is, a madman doesn't know he's mad. In so far as if innovation is a pathway to transformation, you got to have the patient go to the doctor in the first place. Okay, so for me, I agree, of course, with all the innovation discussion, but you've got to create the awareness of what is it we're solving for in the first place. And again, my experience is that the issue of dissonance is just pervasive. What should we be doing? Well, what should we be doing? This is what I'm doing. Well, this is what I'm actually doing. That thing is just everywhere, and it's an exponential problem. So the bit I'm very focused on is methodologies, tools, artifacts, whatever it is, to actually just surface that. Once you surface it, everyone goes, oh my God, is that what the issue is? Because most of the time people are just such a rush. They miss self-diagnose. They diagnose symptomatically, and they're not even aware of this, the madness of King George thing. There's such a rush to boom, 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 fast, cover number. People just throw resources at problems and don't get a breath to sit back and think and say, what is the causal issue? And anything that can help surface that dissonance in the first place is good. So any of the things that anything that has worked, and we've had a lot of stuff that has worked incredibly well, has been low fidelity, nothing to do with technology, nothing. It's literally the whole thing is, if you can't draw it, you don't understand it. You give me one workshop with 20 people, the first thing I do is,
each of you draw what you think the problem is, and then let's get it like the old acetate overhead projectors, and if you literally overlay them on top of each other, what would the problem look like? And you suddenly realize, Jesus, John said that but drew that, Paudie said that but drew that. The fact that everyone gets this moment of revelation that goes, oh my God, so that's what the problem is. The problem isn't the problem. The problem isn't there isn't a shared mental model of what the problem is. That's what my experience has been consistently, whatever the core issue is itself.
Barry, I love that. I know we're at time. Are there any other closing thoughts? Because I think some of even the shared mental model that could be a whole nother discussion as well. How do we get to those shared mental models and have those healthy, productive conversations to move through? There's so many great things I've heard. I'm not even going to try to synthesize to single points. But I didn't know if Paidi, Fran, or John had any closing thoughts.
Add one quick thought. I was really heartened to hear Barry talk about something that Fran and I talked about the whole time now is a sense of being mindful about how he identifies who to put in what roles on a project by project basis. That is fantastic, and I want to see more of that. I think if we want to understand sort of what we're up against, just take a look at hiring specs or job specs. Targeting about, I would say, probably 5% of the cognitive range. So we're going to have to build a framework that actually shows what happens when you deploy people in far more mindful ways than that. That's a thought, and I think we can do it, absolutely. And I love, Barry, to your point, in those small little steps and ways. Thanks, man.
Yeah. So look, for me, yeah, look, it is important, and I see a lot of comments here that are spot on. That we need to be more diverse in our hiring, etc. But look, we also have an existing body of employees. We have an existing body of partners. There's so much we can do by getting going today, by empowering those. And in some cases, they're already doing it and we're oblivious to it. That there's people at a local level innovating under the cover of darkness or whatever else. And we really need to empower those where they'll step above and make a far bigger difference to our organization. They have the desire, they have the ambition, and we need to just support them. And I think growing innovation around those people will deliver far better results than this big innovation we're trying to do, the innovation theater stuff, which is just ridiculous. It's an excuse for innovation in lots of organizations. So look at what we have. Let's start going today, and let's drive an ambition.
Get stuck in.
Get stuck in.
Thank you, everybody. This was for me, selfishly, it's always a great time for me to be able to converse with, and especially get these opinions from the panelists. So I really appreciate it. And everybody for sharing your time and perspectives in the chat. It was great having you all here.